I have no slides, so I just get to talk at you, to you, with you. I'll talk a little bit about the MODIS processing pipeline. I'm not necessarily the most experienced one to talk to you about this. Many of us understand some MODIS, but we do have Edward King in the room with us today, who knows the ins and outs of a lot more detail of MODIS than I do. So feel free to jump in, please, Edward, when I say something a little silly. As Wenjin said at the start, we've got this MODIS fits into this data processing box at the bottom of the graphic here, and it's kind of the second cab off the rank after Landsat, trying to squeeze into the cube. And in doing that, we've had to work through a number of issues as to, I guess, from my point of view, our point of view, getting Landsat-centric configuration out of the cube and into the data processing space, so that the cube becomes a little bit more generic, and MODIS can slot into being another data set within the cube. So there's been quite a bit of back and forward with Alex and more recently Peter Wang as well, trying to understand where the right boundary is between cube infrastructure and what we need to do in the data processing space. I think once we have MODIS pipeline, if you like, in the pre-processing data management space, butted up against the cube and being sucked into the cube, we'll know a lot more about what's required on the data processing side versus what the cube can do. And that will facilitate a lot of other data sets being able to be ingested into the cube. So that's in a way a practical excuse, if you like, for why it's taken us a while to get MODIS up and going. Where we are at the moment is we have the MODIS. I'll back out a little bit from that comment. There are effectively two streams of MODIS available to us. One is from the ground receiving stations and or NASA that come through in a swath format in 5-minute granules. This is what we're talking about when we say MODIS going into the cube. The second stream of MODIS, which many users may be familiar with, is the land products from the USGS. We also have all this, but this is not in scope. It's not in scope for the cube because it comes with a range of aggregating, remapping, there was another word I had there as well, not so much reformatting, but the remapping, the aggregating, and some of the algorithmic concerns with that data set means we have less control over the per pixel environment, if you like, in the MODIS space. But come back to the swath, we're much more aligned with what GA are already doing with Landsat and Cube's already doing with Landsat, in that we can manage everything on a per pixel basis a lot easier. So we have a full archive of MODIS Level 1A data sitting on the NCI. This has been built and coordinated primarily by Edward over the last number of years. Strong coordination with GA and CSIRO and a number of other universities and players in the MODIS raw data space over a number of years. Also supported by IMOS, Edward's hat, and Turn, my hat. We have this full archive here. It's been ticking away. Edward's been using it for various MODIS processing applications, so there's an amount of software processed there. To get into the terrestrial space, which is going to be most useful for most of our applications, in terms of marrying up with Landsat, I suppose, we need in particular, we need a Modo 9 algorithm. That's the code name for surface reflectance to be built, and from that we can consider how we build the other algorithms, whether we build data layers that go into the cube at the other algorithm levels, whether it's BRDF corrected and vegetation indices and so forth, or we build those algorithms to work on the fly. But nevertheless, we need this Modo 9. It's our base surface reflectance. Where we're at the moment is that Edward and I have to look at, with GA, how to build a new refreshed Modo 9 algorithm. This is going to take us a little bit of time to understand some of the code base, but there's enough experience around the room. We just needed the priority or something to actually spend the time and make this happen. We understand most of what we need to do, I think, 98%. I'll give ourselves a little wiggle room in case there are a couple of surprises, but 98% of what we need to do in terms of preparing files and making them available to be sucked straight into the cube. We've been working with Alex and Peter Wang, and we understand that. But we do have this, we have some Modo 9 data available. 500 metre bands will be the first cabs off the rank in this space. But of note, and particularly for the Allenby crew who will be doing Modis Landsat blending, we don't have pixel angles and possibly the sun angles and so forth, because they were selected in the original run of our Modo 9 algorithms. So we know we're not working with a proper Modis Modo 9 product per se, but we're still working on that pipeline. We'll get that pipeline sorted out, which will buy us a little bit of time for Edward and I and GA to go back through and work out how to build a proper Modo 9 algorithm and thus process the full archive for Modis and slurp all that in. Does that make some sense? That's, I'm trying to catch up with all these hoops and roundabouts, if you like, as we go through this. But I'm more engaged in this space and working with the Data Cube and Modis and some of the application side this financial year than I have been in the past. So that's why you see my name popping up a bit in this space, but I am using and leveraging Edward's experience and GA's experience in this space. Feel free to jump in with a question on Modis if there's anything to add or query on that. If not, I'll say two words on AVHRR. That'll be, for Edward and I, the next cab off the rank. We've probably got a lot more work to do in terms of getting a coordinated processing system from the archive data through to something that comes to the cube. So that's a lot more work in the data processing space before we get to the cube there, but nevertheless it's something we can work through, and if we know that cube target, we'll find it a lot easier to bring the AVHRR into spec. That probably won't happen until next year, but it's certainly on the cards to some degree. So from my point of view, it's very exciting, all this cube business, because it gives us a great functional way to get some of our large archives into a much more accessible and usable format going forward.
So
yes, Brian.
That means that those workflows, if you want, or those derived products which rely on the LTDAC to Modis Embark to build for the medium term continue to be done the same way as they are not going to be transitional.
That's right. So outside of the whole cube discussion, and this secondary stream of Modis processing, which Juan's referring to from USGS, which many of you may be familiar with, that will be maintained. That will be continued and no problem. But it's not something that's going to come necessarily into scope to be included into the cube as data layers. Because if we did that, all we'd be doing is shifting pixels around and getting them onto the cube grid and slotting them in. Possibly handy. We could think about it if there's use for that, but we're going to lose a lot of control over what those pixels actually mean and where they've come from if we go down that pathway. So that system we maintain. One's fractional cover will continue to run off that LPDAC system for now, but in parallel we'd like to build the capability to work from the Modo 9 surface reflectance swath data of Modis to build up a consistent suite for ourselves going forward.